Welcome to the Theorist Composer Collaboration, a podcast interview series highlighting modern composers and their compositions. My name is Aaron DiZarilla. I'm the host of this podcast and also a graduate music theory student at Florida State University. Today I will be talking with Professor Nadine Silverman, who, alongside her piece, Voix de Femmes, is the featured guest for this episode. We discuss her background, networking, subverting sexism in musical forms, pushing for representation, and so much more. So, without further ado, this is an excerpt from Voix de Femmes, and welcome to the TCC. Again, the music that you were just listening to is an excerpt from the piece titled Voix de Femmes by Professor Nadine Silverman, who, alongside their music, is the featured guest for this episode. That leads me to welcome Professor Silverman herself to the program. How are you?
I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing fine on this wonderfully humid Tallahassee morning. You're in Pennsylvania, right?
I am in Pennsylvania. I'm in Norristown, Pennsylvania.
What's the weather like up there?
Sunny and not that humid, but still a little bit.
Oh, wouldn't it be nice? I guess I'll just have to wait until late September. All that aside, Professor Silverman, or is it okay if I call you Nadine?
Yeah, absolutely.
How about go ahead, introduce yourself personally, professionally, academically, whatever you choose.
I am a musician, composer, clarinetist, collaborator, and a lifelong learner.
Yeah, of course. And so, it's we just had a conversation or a brief conversation before starting to hit record on whether or not you wanted to be introduced as professor, because you have something quite fun, quite exciting happening in your life right now. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, of course. I have recently been appointed instructor of music theory, composition, and aural skills at Westchester University in Pennsylvania. So I am starting on Monday, officially Professor Silverman.
Wonderful, wonderful, super exciting, especially someone who is so young. That is literally the dream for all of us, for
Thank you.
me, quite frankly. I mean, it takes so much to get to that point. So you're teaching, you said you're doing music theory and aural skills. See, at Florida State University, how the graduate program or how the professor-student relations work is essentially all of the undergrad music theory and aural skills classes are taught by GAs, taught by graduate students, such as myself. I'll be starting to teach songwriting next week, which I'm very excited for. And undergrads, with a couple exceptions, but largely do not directly interact with the supervising faculty member. I mean, of course, if they need something, they can. And specialty classes, sure, but that's mostly grad students who take classes directly from the faculty. How does it work at the university that you're starting to work at?
Well, from my understanding in Pennsylvania, graduate students can't teach classes. Um,
Oh,
it's all professors. Yeah, it's I think specific to Pennsylvania. At least that's what I was told when I was an undergraduate. But we have a graduate assistant for the department, and he does kind of behind the scenes administrative stuff. He's not allowed to actually even grade things. He can help us tabulate grades and put together materials like answer keys, but he's not allowed to teach a class or a section. He is allowed to tutor. So that's kind of what the graduate assistant responsibilities are, at least at Westchester. I'm pretty sure it's a statewide public school thing, but I'm not entirely positive, but I think it is. It's Pennsylvania.
fair enough, fair enough. So I put this a little bit forward in the questions, but since we're on this professorship, not to like obsess on something, it's an amazing. This is the ultimate goal of so many people. Further than just finding, well, maybe even how to find the right opportunity. Like I said, a couple of times, I hope to be in your position or somewhere similar, and I'm pretty sure all my colleagues do as well, and so many others do. What can you say about your academic and professional journey? I don't know, give some tips, some insight. What was it like? What led you up to here?
It's a lot of working your network. I guess it's not always an easy task. There's a lot of emotional energy that goes into it. I am lucky to be an extrovert in that sense, but even if you're not, just don't miss a networking opportunity if it presents itself to you. A lot of it, I was told to go to festivals as an undergraduate, and I always had to work over the summer and take classes. And so I never actually got to a festival. And I knew that that's where a lot of networking and those connections with people around the country got made. The first festival I went to, I was a grad student, and it was only a week long. Because it was the most time that I could go, and that festival actually yielded 2 commissions today, like so far. And so really, like, don't ever assume that somebody you meet in your field is not going to be able to, be some sort of asset in your career moving forward. The music world is so, so small, and everybody knows each other. You have second level connections with so many people that are really important, and probably first level connections with people who are really important. And so I never like to write anybody off as like a bridge that I'm willing to let go or to burn. One thing that you can do, just to everybody when you're in school, to get your teachers to be those good connections for you, just act like you care, even if you
Hopefully,
kind of don't. I
I
mean,
was about to say, hopefully you do.
yeah, hopefully you do. Like, theoretically, you're paying money to go to college, you should probably care. But if you don't act like you do, it goes a long way with faculty. You build up that good positive credit with faculty, you know, like I am always professionally dressed, even when I was a student. Sometimes it's hard because sometimes you just roll out of bed and you're 8 a.m. class and you're like, I'm just gonna wear sweatpants. And you can, but you know, like when you show up to your performances, when you show up to your juries, when you show up to anything like that, to evening performances, just present yourself professionally. Really, really try to work on that. If it's not a skill you have, learn how to write a good email. And I guess the story that I have a story that kind of goes along with it, just in how random it can be. So in the fall of 2019, I had just graduated from my undergraduate. I was preparing my grad auditions that semester, so I didn't have anything really to do other than just practice and work. But our band director was going on sabbatical, and we were going to have 3 guest conductors throughout that semester. And so I said, okay, I'll play like a utility clarinet if they need one. You know, I'll play contra or whatever. And it turned out that they needed a bass clarinetist. And so I played bass clarinet for 3 concerts. You know, I loved playing in the ensemble and it was just a lot of fun to do. So I figured, you know, a couple nights a week, I'll go play in a band and have fun. And one of those graduate conductors, or one of those guest conductors, sorry, he was a retired Navy band conductor and he's the current conductor of the Maryland Winds. And I didn't think much of it. I didn't think we would really get to know them at all. But he happened to be the guest conductor who was working with all the graduate conductors on some of their repertoire. And one of those graduate conductors was asked to play a piece that I wrote that I thought the main conductor was going to conduct, but the graduate conductor did it. And so he actually worked with the guest conductor on my piece. I didn't even know this until the guest conductor approached me in the hallway and said, "Hey, great piece." And I had to like buffer. It took me a few seconds to even know that he was talking to me. But you know, so I had that brief interaction. 3 years go by. I get a Facebook message from him in my 8 a.m. graduate seminar, and he's asking if I have any clarinet quartet music because he has a friend who wants to program a concert of clarinet quartet music by women, and there's not many pieces. And so he put me in touch with a woman named Laura Grantier. And that is how the piece that we're going to talk about today got written. And that relationship has spurred an entire concerto commission by this point. So just having that random person had heard my music 3 years ago and then thought of me in a moment, and I've had 4 pieces played at this international festival because of that relationship and a brand new commission. It's like insane how these things just kind of tumble in, these connections that you don't think are going to amount to anything one day just randomly like happen. I mean, it does take some luck, obviously, but just to make yourself the person that people think of first for an opportunity, that's a really valuable thing to be able to do.
Oh, for sure. And to redouble on something that you said earlier, I'm also thankful that I don't know if I'm fully an extrovert, but at least a people person, or at least comfortable talking to people. Why would I be here, talking to you or talking to all these other people? And because, as you said, so much lives and dies on your connections, your networking, and your, may I say, collaboration. And yeah, I mean, not everything pans out. Honestly, most things don't, but it's just shooting that shot as many times as possible. You're a good example for, I not knowing how small the music world is in my case, because, I go through Instagram and Facebook to find composers that I'm not personally familiar with, so I don't get stuck in, this is not the FSU show or the UF show, though for the past couple of weeks it might have been the UF show. You knew a bunch of the people that were featured on here when really I just came across your website, was looking at your music, and I thought it pertinent to invite you on. And speaking of your music, so even though you're an adjunct professor of music theory and aural skills, of course, as you've said, you are a composer. And so you're talking about your music, how some of that stuff is getting put out into the world. How would you describe yourself as a composer? Whether that be a style, a time period, compare it to another composer. How would you describe your music?
I definitely would describe it as it's kind of like tonal adjacent. So I don't consider myself strictly tonal or strictly atonal. I'm kind of somewhere in between. I definitely use a lot of tonality. It's almost secondary to me. I don't think too hard about it. I kind of subscribe to if it sounds good, it is good. And obviously, if it sounds good is subjective. But if I like how it sounds, I'm happy to put it out into the world. And as a composer of instrumental music, it's really important for me to be a good collaborator, and that it keeps coming back. But I love learning from people who play instruments that I don't play. It's my favorite part of composing is putting my music in front of people who don't play my instrument and then getting that feedback from them in real time. Like, hey, maybe reconsider X run because of things that you can't predict because I don't play every instrument. And I'm always willing to take that feedback from performers because I know that they know their instrument better than I do.
Yeah, yeah. What sticking with the binary comparison, you tonal, atonal, or post-tonal, whatever. How about programmatic versus absolute? Where do you put yourself between that?
That's an interesting question because there have been a few pieces that I've written and I'm like, I don't want to write a program note. I don't frankly think it's about anything. And the first question I get asked, performers, audience members, is, oh, what's this piece about? Like, you have to speak about this piece. What are you going to say? And so I've kind of just become a programmatic composer. There are certain pieces where I write and I'm like, this is for sure about this exact place. This is for sure about this exact feeling, this exact event. I write a lot about nature and hikes, but then there are some pieces that I write. I have another clarinet quartet that I could have called Clarinet Quartet number 1 and been perfectly satisfied, but I kept getting asked what it was about, so I just made something up. um,
Yeah, so about that music meaning, the push, or at least the mild pressure on composers to have a programmatic meaning of some kind, I've seen that as pretty consistent across the months I've been doing this podcast and maybe a little bit before. And I'm going to ask you how you feel about that. But I don't know. I've said this before on this podcast as a casual music listener and enjoyer, and sometimes a theorist. I always appreciate a good story, or maybe not necessarily a story, but a vibe, an intentional mood or feeling. I've yeah, I think it was last week or something. I said that it's always really cool when the cool chords mean something cool. Or man, that's dumb, but
no, but you're right.
you get what I mean. Yeah. So, I personally, as just a person, not an academic or a professional, don't find too much personal value in pure absolute music, especially when it's presented that way. What's your opinion on that?
I agree with you probably 95% of the way. It's the few pieces that I write that I genuinely am like, I just wrote this because, and it doesn't have a deeper meaning. And I would like to have the, I guess, flexibility with audiences to not have to speak about it if it doesn't mean anything, or just to be like, hey, this is pretty. I wrote it. Listen. But it's rare that I actually write a piece like that. It's only happened twice. And one of them is not, I think, out into the world.
Mm.
A lot of the times I'll get asked to write something about a specific vibe or mood or place or concept. And that kind of does that work for me. So I don't have to, worry about it. I don't have to come up with it. I have an idea in my mind. I'm thinking specifically about this one piece that I wrote that is out in the world, that has no deeper meaning for me, at least. I just wrote it. I had to write something. It was the pandemic. I was like, I haven't written anything in a year and a half because I have, pandemic brain. And I need to write something. And so I wrote this clarinet quartet, and it ended up being really beautiful. And a lot of people are enjoying playing it, but I can't come up with anything with a story. And I just don't have one. And I do keep getting asked what it's about. And I'm like, well, all my other music, I know what that's about. Can that be enough? Can we just say that this one is just nice? So that's kind of, I guess, the 5% of, I just want the freedom to do something that isn't. But 95% of the time I write things that are programmatic, intentionally.
Fair enough. I sometimes get not from this podcast, but just like I don't know, doing my work at Florida State, doing my work at Florida State, doing my work. Oh my gosh. Anyways, doing my work at Florida State, I typically use the word programmatic a little too fragrantly. For example, when getting into a conversation with someone about programmatic or absolute music, I typically think of it as absolute is usually a black and white thing, whereas levels of programmaticism has many different shades, and that can come in many different forms. And when I'm talking to someone about, let's say, some pieces from the classical canon, if someone is defending pure absolute music, I'll point to Mahler's like Farewell Symphony. In my opinion, the last movement where it fades away is it's probably not the most accurate thing. I wouldn't tell a composition or theory student this, but to me that is some level of programmaticism, or at least the audience has created it in a mythology over time. And so that's one of the reasons why that's such a special symphony, or at least a portion of it. And it's like how I got into a bad habit of calling almost everything in music counterpoint, when I know counterpoint is like a traditional study of, early tonal, whatever, like line against line. I think about it more broadly, just voices moving within music, which I get, whatever. You get kind of rambling on. Okay, let's focus back to you and your music instead of broad things. You previewed it a little bit. But today we're talking about a piece of yours, Voix de Femmes. So let's start with the title. Well, first, why is it in French? There's
It
one
is,
question. Yeah,
yeah.
go ahead.
So the piece, I actually didn't choose the title. It is named after the commissioning quartet, the Voix de Femmes quartet.
Oh, okay, that makes sense. All right, fair enough. And voix is four, right? Yeah.
Voices, it's voices. So it means
Oh,
women's voices. Yes.
man, I need to brush up on my French. We were talking about that earlier. I took 3 years of it in high school and forgot all of it. Probably should have taken Spanish, but oh well. So, Voix de Femme. So that's the name of the ensemble,
Yeah, it's French for women's voices.
Women's Voices. And so on Women's Voices, well, that makes even more sense with the intention of the piece. And I'm even more excited to talk to you about this because you are clearly a qualified music theorist as well. Can you talk a bit about, you detail it on your website page, which will be in the description of this episode if you want to see the full performance video by the ensemble, which is linked on Nadine's website. Can you talk a bit about Voix de Femme, what you were thinking about with it, the intentionality of the piece?
There were a few different, I guess, catalysts for this piece. One of them was what I was asked to do. And what I was asked to do was kind of, now looking back, a little bit wild. I was asked to write a 4-movement clarinet quartet in standard formal structure. So fast, slow, scherzo, finale, with generally traditional formal structures in each movement. I had never done that before. And I was also asked that each movement be a representative of one of the 4 members of the quartet. So each movement has a subtitle of the name of the person who is either featured in that movement and who the movement is about. And I had never met any of these women at this point. The person who the point person, Laura Grantier, who handled the commission, sent me a list of adjectives and personality traits about each of the 4 women in the quartet. And so that was what I had to go on. This was my first commission by a professional group. And the amount of anxiety, I'm just going to put that out there.
Oh man, that's crazy because you're super constricted by the form and by the, because then form begets melodic style, tonality. Like you got to kind of adhere to a lot of that to kind of
Right.
like make it recognizable, which you do. And then to have to like,
Well, and those,
yeah, no, go
sorry,
ahead.
and those forms I had almost written off as a young composer as like, these are antiquated and I don't want to use them. I want to be free. I want to do what I want to do. And then my first professional commission out of the gate, she's like, hey, can you write these classical forms for me? And I was like, oh boy.
And then on top of that, I can't imagine having to musically describe people you've never met.
Yes, that was the hard, like I want to say one individual thing was the hardest part. It was one of the hardest pieces I've ever had to write because of all of that. And you can kind of tell from the first few measures how against that. Now, I have a very good relationship with Laura at this point, so like me saying this is not going to be a problem, but you can tell from that first, just a bit of chromaticism. I'm like, this is the melody. It has a natural third and a flat third in it, and I just like not going to subscribe. I said she didn't tell me what to do with the tonality, so I am going to do what I want to do with it. And kind of took that and ran with it a little bit. The other thing that really drove it was, this is a piece written for a program because there isn't enough clarinet quartet music by women, and she wants me to use these sexist things, these sexist forms to write. And I will talk about form as having some degree of sexism, because the old scholars like to paint the primary first theme as like masculine, and the adjectives that tend to go along with that are strong and dominant. And then the secondary theme is the feminine theme, and it's called lyrical and submissive. And my personal favorite, it submits to the tonal power of the masculine theme, which, yeah. So I actually talked about that at the premiere to the audience, and it got some chuckles.
So here's a question.
Yeah.
What was the commissioner's reaction to you kind of poking fun at the seriousness of the historical sexism?
I mean, she agreed with me. She saw a lot of merit in what I was doing, and she really liked what I did. End result, they loved the piece. And they thought that I had somehow captured each of them really well, and they really liked what I did with the form. And I think the form ended up actually being something positive for me. I was really surprised how much I enjoyed writing in these forms, because I thought they were going to be really restrictive, but they actually ended up kind of allowing me to subvert those sexist notions a little bit, because there is no sense of tonal submission. There is no sense of a theme getting kind of lambasted by another theme. Just in the nature of what I did, I had each person in the quartet say their piece on a, like, in their own way. The movement titles also, I think I already mentioned this, but the first movement, or all four movements, feature the person that they're about most heavily, so they all get to kind of have their own moment in the sun, and no one's fighting with each other, no one's, talking over each other, interrupting each other, or submitting or anything. So I definitely played with it a lot, and I kind of took the form as something that can kind of fuse tonal music and not so tonal music, and we'll talk a little bit about it when we talk about the first movement. But I did, this is relevant, I did my undergraduate thesis on Amy Beach's Gaelic Symphony.
Oh, okay, cool.
In which the secondary theme is the theme that quote unquote wins out in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously composer intent, we can argue until we're blue in the face, but I kind of saw that as like a little feminist subversion in that, because she, studied with all these men, and all of her peers were men, and it was just her, and she was like 20, and so
what's funny is you bring that up. We actually, in Dr. Laura Dahlman at University of Florida, shout out to her, she was a great professor in music theory or music history 3. We looked at the Gaelic Symphony, and I think we actually talked about that, or at least we talked about the different structures of the movements and how they don't adhere to the traditional symphonic form. So yeah,
Right.
Gaelic,
Yeah. And
the
I've
Gaelic symphony
loved
is really
that.
good. Yeah.
Yeah. And her scherzo is in 2/4. Like it's just so like she does, again, can't say if this was on purpose or not because it's not written down anywhere, but I like to think that it was on purpose. It helps me sleep at night. And I didn't do exactly that, but I did try to kind of pull the like masculinity out of the formal structure before plugging in what I wanted to plug into it, which was my musical material.
Yeah, yeah, of course. Now, before we get into the more music theory or analytical section, I do kind of want to sit on this topic a little bit longer about the historical sexism of different elements of composition, but honestly, in this sense, it's a little bit more in the theory or analytical, uh, looking back on music, and then that gets perpetuated through composition. The easiest way that that dichotomy of the strong primary theme and the weak or submissive, as you said, secondary theme, actually it was first presented to me as the masculine and feminine theme by uh, a prominent female professor that I'm not going to name, and it was done in all seriousness, and it had to do with Sousa marches specifically. I see your face on that. Yeah. So, which is unfortunate, but so, and clearly you are very aware of these subjects. You did research on Amy Beach's Gaelic Symphony, those things that you're talking about. This is kind of more what's usually talked about in the last section of the podcast, but since we're on it, I kind of want to go to it now. Your experience in the field of music theory or composition with I almost feel weird to ask it because I'm uh very much part of the historic establishment of a cisgendered white man who's at pretty tall, and I have a deep voice and present well in the front of a classroom, and I'm extroverted. So it's not like I'm part of. I also had a Christian upbringing in a middle class family in the South. So it's not as though I am part. I don't think I'm part of any marginalized group actually, but so uh, like any. But so my question is pretty broad, and you can take it however you want. But I find this a good opportunity to talk about. I'm thinking about. I feel bad citing research to you that there's a good chance you haven't seen it, but I there's a music theorist at Florida State University who published. I don't know if it was actually published, but I don't remember. But Molly Reed, who is a PhD student in music theory, did a paper on decolonizing the classroom. Now
Yep.
that had to. Oh, have you heard of it?
I've heard of it. I don't think I've read it. I may have read part of it in a
Oh,
pedagogy
cool.
class.
Oh,
Um,
cool. Yeah, Molly's a great theorist in person. But this is part of it. The historical domination of a certain class of people, which is white European men, mostly from Western Europe, but you have some Slavic and Russian in there. And even then, it's such a small class of people. What are your thoughts on that, on the current state of things, the underpinnings that still exist that are not good, maybe the overpinnings too? I don't know. I'm just leaving this open for you to say. I tried to get to a specific question, but it didn't work. So just go ahead.
so I actually have a lot about this. I did my master's thesis on, I've done a lot of just various study of pieces that have stood out to me over time. And the one thing that has really stood out to me about the pieces that I'm most interested in is that convention does not give you the tools to analyze those pieces. The conventions that I'm talking about are like the textbooks that we all use. And
Okay, wait, can you say that line again? Conven
yes, conventions do not give us the tools to analyze them.
Conventions do not give us the tools to analyze them. That's a great quote. That's a great
Thanks.
quote. Anyway, sorry to interrupt. I
This is
just
my
that
entire master's thesis was about this exact topic. I was talking about William Grant Still's piece, Poem for Full Orchestra. And if you try to plug that into any kind of formula that you would plug a Brahms into, you're going to get no results. Your results are not going to make any sense. And you're going to say, oh, I can't analyze this. Not you, but people, scholars in the past. Oh, I can't analyze this piece through traditional means, so it's probably not that good. That's like the thread of thought that I have found in a lot of that, or maybe not that good, but not worth trying to analyze, or not worth trying to analyze through conventional means. But then that's the end of it, right? So what I did was I didn't allow that to be the end of it. I didn't allow not being able to plug it into a white Western European tradition to be the end of the line. I said, well, we need to come up with new tools so that we can understand what's going on here, because it's really interesting. And I personally would like to figure out what's going on. I like to use music theory basically to, like, if a piece gives me goosebumps, I want to know why. And so I'll take that and I'll mark it down. I'll say that was a good spot. I'm going to go look at what built up to that. That's going to be where I study. And I had also done some research in a similar vein on Samuel Coleridge Taylor, because if you just look at his forms, they're very traditional. But within the form, so in a traditional sonata, for, I'm sure most of the listeners know, but for those who don't, there are 4 themes sometimes, mostly 2 main ones and then 2 other ones. And they come up 1, 2, 3, 4 in chronological order, always. Samuel Coleridge Taylor's do not. They're mixed in, they're everywhere. They happen before the, like, you get like 1 and 2 at the same time, and then you have 2, and then you have 1, and then you have a little bit of 4 in there that you don't know is 4 yet, because it's not, you haven't heard 4, and then you get 3 with a little bit of 4, and then you get 4 with a little bit of 2, and it's like really very interesting and peppered in. And I hadn't found that in a lot of places, so I had to come up with a way to make known that what's going on in this quote unquote traditional looking sonata is actually completely not traditional, and we don't have the tools to understand it, and so we're just ignoring it basically and just saying, oh, this is its traditional sonata, we don't need to go further with it. And so I kind of took that structure and applied it to for however it could be applied to William Grant Still's piece. I had to tweak it a little because, hey, they're different composers from different countries, but it was the similar thing where, I had to come up with a new structure to analyze a piece. Sometimes you just have to come up with new ways to analyze things. You can't just plug it in. It's not all plug-inable to our old stuff. So
thank you for that. Thank you for that. It would be great to read that, I'm sure. And so here's a follow-up to that. One thing that I've learned going into graduate school, I kind of knew this a little bit before, but especially after going to graduate school, there's a good deal of, similar to pearl clutching, canon clutching of the classical canon, so-called canon, or it is, whatever. The historicized line of the great composers. Whenever I go to a bookstore and I see like the music session, it's like, oh, the great composers, and there's like 4 listed, and you can probably guess the 4: Bach, Beethoven, Brahms, and maybe Stravinsky, if you're really, maybe that's a really modern book. But anyways, the point is of my question is, what has the reaction been to your approach of analysis and those motivations?
In my spheres, it's been pretty positive. My advisors have been all for it, and the panels that read my papers loved my papers. So I didn't feel like I was, going to be in the gauntlet trying to talk about my paper or papers, but I definitely feel that, if I were to present at a conference, I would probably be really nervous to present that research to like a room full of random scholars. That would probably shake me to my core a little bit, but I really believe in it. And I think that I understand why the canon exists. And I also understand that because the canon exists, all of our analytical tools from, all of the history of music theory have been in service of those pieces. And so we've built our tools for analysis around a set of, 12, like German composers, basically.
Or German adjacent.
Right. And those tools are phenomenal for analyzing any music written by those people. But that's not like what's being written anymore. And obviously we have the tools to analyze 12-tone music because we had to create those but we created those. We made those. We decided, oh, music is changing. We need to change how we analyze things. We have 20th century theory now. So why not continue that and say, look at all these pieces that are outside of the canon because the composer was a woman, or the composer was a person of color, or the composer didn't study at conservatory with all the white men because they couldn't, because they weren't allowed. And then you have all these people who didn't study the music of the people who our tools can analyze their music. And so they wrote something a little different. And you don't have to abandon those tools, but you can tweak them, you can change them, you can swap out a drill bit here and there. Like there's so much that you can do. And there's so much music in that middle ground that is just not being analyzed because we don't know how. And scholars do not like not knowing how to do stuff. And I say that as a scholar who doesn't like not knowing how to do stuff. I mean, it's just in our nature.
Yes, I second that. And I can't really put what you said any better. That was fantastic. And I'd like to preview, this is a great little announcement, is that 2 weeks after the release of this episode, or 2 weeks after Nadine's episode is released, is going to be the second TCC Roundtable, where I'm going to have on music theorist Albert Wheeler and performer and educator Dr. Pamela Mireles, and we're going to be talking about the classical canon, issues in and around it. So this is a great preview to that, and the topics that Nadine is talking about are going to be spotlighted under that, because I agree. All right, so thank you for going down that. Is there anything else you want to say on that topic? And not the classical canon, I guess you can say feminism in music academia and composition, and your initiatives with all, or your, maybe not initiative, however you want to describe it. Is there anything else you want to add with that?
I mean, I really could go on.
If you want to go on, yeah.
I'm probably not. I mean, it'll be pretty similar to what I've already said. I guess the biggest thing is that I don't actually believe that the canon, like the quote unquote music in the canon, is not, like, it's so important. That music is incredibly important. It is what helped us, get to where we are today. And I like using it to teach certain concepts. I don't like exclusively using it to teach. And I don't like exclusively hearing it in the concert hall. Now, I would not like to never play the Brahms Clarinet Sonata. I love Brahms Clarinet Sonata. It's a wonderful piece. Beautiful pieces. The second one. No, they're both gorgeous. They're both beautiful, and I love them. And violists love them too, for better or worse. And for better, actually, it's good that more people can experience those pieces. I'm just joking.
It's okay.
Well, I don't want to offend any violists. So they're in rare supply. They're important people. So but I think that music is important to learn as a performer, as a theorist, but I wish that we could kind of expand upon it. I don't think that it should occupy 90% of the music that we study. I think it should be proportional to how much music there is. That's how I feel about it.
That's great. Thank you for speaking about all that. I know obviously you have experience in doing so and come in a position of knowledge with that, but I know also sometimes in a public forum, it might not always be the easiest. Hence all of my preliminary I was giving before I actually asked the questions. Anyways, thank you for diverting or going along with the diversion and the discussion with that. Going back to Voix de Femmes, which I think it's important we talk about that and get your perspective.
Well, and it ties in.
Yeah.
I mean, I when I was speaking at the premiere, I was really nervous to speak about that in a public forum and to actually bring up the scholarship and say, like, this is what tradition would have me do, and this is what I did instead, deliberately, because of the circumstances that I'm writing the piece in. And this was also at a time in the clarinet community where there was quite a bit of drama about this.
Really?
I hesitate to use the word drama because it makes it sound so petty, but
yeah, I don't want to sound like a petty bitch, but please tell.
No, it's not. Well, so I'm gonna fully not use a single person's name because that's just not how that's gonna go down.
Probably a smart decision. Yeah.
So there is a current campaign that is wonderful, in my opinion, and it's called Claire Equality. And it came out of people would see a bunch of advertisements for festivals, panels, and all of the judges and all of the teachers would be white men. And so people started asking, where are the women? Where are the people of color? What are you doing? Basically, like, hey, this is not representative of our field, and you shouldn't be doing this. And those comments got a lot of pushback. And so began the hashtag Women Play Clarinet Too, hashtag POC Play Clarinet Too, and all other intersectional and marginalized groups. And it has just become, there's a festival every year. It's called Clarinet Fest. This is where Voix de Femmes was originally premiered, what it was commissioned for. And it's been moderately divided. I think more people are on board than are not on board with Claire Equality. At least that's my sincere hope at this point. But it had just kind of taken hold, and there were a few specific people who were being really vocal against it, to the point of like the fear of lack of safety in the clarinet community. Yeah, some people were receiving threats because of asking the question, hey, where are the women in this festival? Like, what's going on? Now, they asked it at a lot because it happens a lot. And they were vocal for Claire Equality in trying to fight for, it started out as just gender equality, but it has become completely intersectional and so much more than that. And those people were threatened by some other people within the clarinet community. And so that was, I mean, it was a really like weird time.
It's like, come on, people. Are you like,
like for asking, yes. So that was
like, it's just people asking for respect, essentially, and a fair
literally,
and an equitable chance. You know, it's sorry. It's so good. It's so the more
this is exactly how I felt when I was writing this piece, and I was like, oh my god, I have to get up in front of this audience of clarinetists that may or may not agree with the fact that Claire Equality should be a thing, and say blatantly to their faces, this piece was written for a group of women who play clarinet too. And so like doing that, and I was like, oh please, like but it was really well received. I got some snaps, I got some people afterwards were like, I'm glad you said that. The performers had really appreciated what I said. And it ended up being a positive experience, but wow, was I nervous to get up in front of that community and say that at that time, because it was like a month or two after it had really started.
That is quite brave. That's an incredibly high social pressure situation, especially as someone like you've said has not gone to a ton over the span of your career and academic life to a lot of these spaces. I just recently went to my own music theory Southeast, and I didn't even present, and I could, not that there was tension, but it's just that air of academic rigor and performance rigor.
Well, and that was my first premiere at that festival. And so I was like, this is, I guess, the hill I'm going to die on now. Like, I'm like, okay, I mean, this is important to me. It's incredibly important to me. But to get up here as a first timer at this massive international event and immediately off the bat bring it up,
no,
and I wouldn't want anyone in that community who is against Claire Equality to think that I am on their side. And so I'm glad that I said it. I would never take it back, and I wouldn't do it differently if I could do it again. But there was a few moments where I was like, what am I doing to my career right now? And it ended up actually being a really good thing that I did it. But there were a few minutes where I was like, this is my first time. Like, why am I going to ruffle feathers my first time? And then I'm like, no, wait, actually, if I ruffle feathers, it's the right people to ruffle their feathers. And if I get respect from people, then it's the right people that I'm getting the respect from.
Oh, you are very right. Well, kudos on that. And I'm glad I kept asking about this, because I'm It's so fascinating to hear about different pockets of music, and not coming from someone who's not in that community and who just learned about this. You don't need to comment on this, but I'm just going to say, people, grow the fuck up. We are adults. We're playing music. Just respect one another, you assholes. Just thank goodness this is going to be censored. But the curse words, that is. Anyway, so that's my immediate reaction. I'm sure that was in a way to you. You don't need to comment on that. But anyways, so thank you for all that insight, and thank you for all of that. Now let's get into the technical part of it. So as I wrote in my notes to you, and we talked about with the form, the first movement, it's in an ABA form. And it's really clear to tell orally, and of course in the score, as we talked about how novel it is that a brand new fresh piece of music is so clearly identifiable in an ABA form. I'm a sucker for the type of music that you wrote in the B section. I mean, it's just this dancy little jig that completely contrasts from the beginning. And it's like, obviously, the B sections in ABA or any standard lettered form like that, a B section or a C section is always supposed to strongly contrast or attempt to strongly contrast from the A or the primary, whatever that may be. Compositionally, not philosophical. Well, you can go philosophically if you want, but compositionally, how did you naturally put in such a wildly different B section that was, honestly, you could put fiddles in there and it probably would work, especially with that bass clarinet introduction that you had in the bottom. But anyways, can you talk about the first movement a bit?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the bass clarinet is really the driving force of that movement. The bass clarinetist, her name is Jennifer. And so some of the adjectives that I was sent about Jennifer was the one that stuck out to me the most was quiet strength. And so I said, okay, that's really interesting. And that is also very like, this is just because of like the world that we live in, but strength and femininity are often not associated with each other. Strength is usually more associated with men. And so I said, great, I'm going to use that. And like when I play bass clarinet, I love playing bass clarinet. And I feel so like powerful when I play bass clarinet. And so I said, okay, I'm going to use that. I'm going to use that to write the movement. And so when I'm writing for clarinet, I actually write on the clarinet. I will take out my clarinet and I will play and I will improvise and record myself. And then I will write down what I like and not what I don't. And so with this movement, it almost just made sense to have it start out bass clarinet alone, quiet, but low, because that's where that power comes from. And that first gesture in the bass clarinet is what kind of spurs the A section. All that chromaticism in there because I wanted to not do something traditional. And then I thought about, I got to the end of the A section. I was like, okay, where do I go from here? Do I keep up with that material? And I knew that she wanted a traditional form, and I was like, and so I was like, okay, what else makes me feel big and strong when I'm playing bass clarinet? And I'm like, when I get these ripping bass lines and I just get to groove and be the motor for this like thing that's happening above me, for all this crazy stuff that's going on, and I don't have to learn all these crazy runs, I don't have to learn all this crazy technique, I can just go and lay down a groove and just enjoy myself. And so I did that second intentionally, because usually it's powerful theme, lyrical theme, back to the powerful theme, but I completely changed it. I went quiet. It's not really, I don't know if I would consider it lyrical. I mean, I guess maybe a little bit. I said soft chromatic theme to loud, very tonal, very groove based theme, and then back into the original theme for the end. And that middle section is so much fun.
It is.
It's just a good time.
It really is.
Yeah.
And it's funny that we were talking about the Gaelic symphony, not tonally, but it does give a folk feel. The middle section, the dancing folk, what's historically called like the peasant dance or whatever, which in of itself is kind of weird, but but it gives it's a very joyful feeling. And I like your rationalization of a different avenue to demonstrate strength. I think that was a very smart way to do that. So movement 2, which is meditation, with the subtitle for Melissa. This is so when I was analyzing it, you have an ABA form in the beginning in the first movement, and then the second movement is called meditation. Now, my expectations of as we've talked about, are not in modern composition, especially after having started this podcast, if something is blatantly labeled as something, it's usually not that. But in this case, it is a meditation. Like it is a calm, peaceful, and thoughtful. Not that the others aren't thoughtful, but it's a very it has a reflective mood and vibe, something that you would expect when it's labeled meditation. So can you talk a bit about it? Maybe relate to the adjectives that you were given.
For this one, I'm coming up a little short on what the adjectives actually were. For this, but I remember them. Melissa, I've met them all now, so it's great. Melissa is just so calm and grounded, and like she just puts off this like air of you're safe when you're with this person. And I at the time I wrote it, I hadn't met her, but I had heard from Laura that she was, if you were going to give somebody a beautiful lyrical solo, give it to Melissa. And so I said, all right, great. Love that. So again, I wrote the material for this, which is kind of like a little bit through composed. It hints at itself, but it's not in a strict form. Calling it meditation was kind of my way of saying, okay, I don't have to put this in an ABA. I can just write and it'll just be nice. And I love movement too. The 4 women keep asking me to pick my favorite movement, and it changes by day. I've never told them what my favorite movement is. I don't know what my favorite movement is. I don't think I have one. Nor do I have a least favorite movement. I think I just like them all equally, which is usually pretty rare. When I'm writing a multi-movement piece, usually I have one where I'm like, that's some of my best work. And then the other ones I'm like that's good too, I guess. But for this one, I really felt good about all of them. And for this movement specifically, I wanted a complete contrast to the first one and the third one, because I knew the third one was going to be a scherzo and I knew it was going to be edgy. And, with this fast, slow traditional or fast, slow scherzo finale traditional structure, I wanted to take all of that, chromaticism and kind of power of the first movement and just be like, hey, if you ask me to write in C major, it's going to be really pretty. Like, and just to be able to do something lyrical and beautiful after all of that chromaticism, I feel like I was able to kind of just take it and make this complete contrast. And it's also just a nice like oral respite from what happened before and what will be happening after with the E flat clarinet. It's like a palate cleanser.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I did actually use a little bit of counterpoint in this one. I do like, I'll write a melody and then I'll harmonize it. And when I use counterpoint, it's because I'm in a situation where I want the chords to sound their fullest, because counterpoint will do that. Like if you voice lead something quote unquote correctly, it's going to ring. And if it's 4 clarinets, it's going to ring great, because clarinet has this very unique core to the sound. And if you got 4 of them, it's just great. Like it's just you can make crunch, you can do whatever you want, because there's no vibrato. By default, there's no vibrato. You can ask for it. For better or worse, you can ask for it. Performers might not, do it. But in this situation, just that pure tone is what I wanted to go for. And I wanted to say, hey, I'm a clarinetist, and I can create this thing for 4 clarinets that just sounds like it's meant to be for 4 clarinets. And it's just going to make the instrument sound so good. And that's kind of what I took into that movement.
Yeah, I realized when you're talking about all that, I realized that I wrote in my notes to you, I forgot that it sounded like the consonants and the counterpoint was, for lack of a better term, I'm going to say so pure almost in its presentation that it felt like something that Haydn would write. It's to, use a classical canon example to compare. But I am a violinist. This chamber music counterpoint flowing, it was super recognized. It was very clear to me, especially after the nods of the ABA meditation being a meditation. And then this very, as you said, like correct upon correct counterpoint that's within it. It not that you were imitating a classical, like big C classical time period sound, but it was just so exquisite in how perfect the harmonies collapsed and expanded that it was very like you could rewrite that. You wouldn't have to do too much, quite frankly, rewrite that into a string quartet, maybe change some of the harmonies, and it would be imitating something from the classical period. And that's not to say that it sounds like that. It's just that the practice of counterpoint and harmonic structuring is so tight, as you're describing, that it comes across very clearly to the listener, in my opinion.
Well, and that's where I believe in learning all of those skills from old, because they are helpful as a composer. Like, I don't use counterpoint all the time. I use counterpoint in like 2 situations. One is exactly what we just talked about, where I need these chords to really ring, and I don't, I want all the lines to make sense. And a lot of counterpoint for me is, I don't want someone to have like, I don't want the one awkward third clarinet part to like bounce around to random whole notes, because I don't like how those shifts in range sound when you're trying to make beautiful chords. I want everyone to have a smooth line where like the biggest interval anyone's going to have is probably a 4th in the bass and maybe a 3rd anywhere else, because it just sounds so smooth and everyone's playing a line that makes sense. They get to stay in one little pocket of their range, and it's beautiful, because I think clarinet is beautiful. But
Really.
But and the other situation in which I would use counterpoint, or rather just proper key change rules in music theory, is when sometimes I'll be writing a melody and it'll be like, help, I've fallen into G flat major and I can't get up. And so then I will cleverly theorize my way out of that situation, because nobody wants to play in G flat major. And I don't blame them. So That's when I use counterpoint rules. And it's pretty much only then, or like if I'm orchestrating a big chorale section in a large ensemble piece, it's the same thing. I don't need anyone bouncing around and being awkward. I can just have them all play beautiful counterpoint, and it's going to make the band or orchestra sound better anyway.
Well, speaking of bouncing around and being awkward and not following counterpoint rules, let's talk about the third movement, which is a
yeah.
scherzo. It's I didn't even need to really it was I realized that, oh, you're doing a scherzo like idiom. That's the idiom of a